in place executive orders in an effort to continue to move us as far along this continuum of trying to get something accomplished this year. We've chosen to use electronic means to have this next public meeting, and hopefully it works. I will remind us that it is a public meeting. We do have not only the participants on the gambling study group, but we have 3 presenters, probably multiple presenters in 3 different organizations, and anyone else who wanted to call and be a part of this, whether it be media or the public. It was identified appropriately on the Secretary of State's website more than 7 days ago to do that. So just to give you some of the housekeeping rules, I'm going to ask Baker to go through a couple of things that you need to know and be mindful of as we go through this presentation.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, this meeting is being recorded so it can be reviewed later and shared with the public. The way we have the format for this is that I'm sharing my screen, which will outline the presentations of the meeting. So the members of the study group and only the members and the presenters will be able to talk and discuss with each other during the presentation. The only images that will be shown will be the ones that you see in front of you currently. To kind of, I guess, help view your screen, you'll notice if your screen is in full view, you'll see a floating bar at the top. It'll have icons like mute, start video. You go all the way over to the more button. You can select hide video panel and hide floating meeting, and that will clear up your screen so that it'll just show the entire image full with nothing blocking it. I would ask that you keep your phones or computers on mute until you have to ask a question for any potential background noise from showing.
And you will not see any faces. All you'll see is the presentation material. Remember, we are being recorded. It is a public meeting, and keep it on mute for that. This meeting, as the first one, will be prepared and will be released to the general public. So with that, I think it would be time to call the roll. Baker, if you would so call the roll to make sure we have those that are part of the study committee on the line.
Mr. Ray Almodovar.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Deborah Barnhart. Mr. Walter Bell. Dr. Regina Benjamin. Mr. Young Boozer.
Here.
Sheriff Sam Cochran. Ms. Liz Huntley.
Here.
Mr. Carl Jameson. Justice Jim Main.
Here.
Mr. Phil Rawls.
Here.
Mayor Todd Strange.
Present.
Dr. Mike Watson.
Here.
All right, so we missed Walter Bell, Deborah Bernhardt, Regina Benjamin, and Carl Jameson. Carl, you were on earlier. Unmute and let us hear from you, or have we lost you?
This is Regina Benjamin. You guys had muted me. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we'll unmute everybody.
Okay, this is Carl. I'm here.
Good. All right. How about Deborah Bernhardt? How about Walter Bell?
I think Dr. Barnhart just joined.
Okay. Dr. Bernhardt just joined, it said, according to the computer. Deborah, are you here?
I think it's still loading.
Okay. Sorry for the technical challenges, but Deborah is loading now. So she should be coming in any second.
Dr. Barnhart, we're showing that you don't have a mic available. You might need to call in on your cell phone. I guess we'll
All right,
go ahead. I'll try to work
Yeah,
on it.
okay. We'll work on trying to bring Deborah in, and then we'll wait to see what happens with Walter and also with the sheriff.
This is Mike
Is that-
Watson. This is Mike Watson. I've been trying to get in on my computer and I'm not having good luck with that, but I am on my cell phone. And
Okay.
my question is, if I'm on my cell phone and I'm seeing the policy statement that's on the screen, can I still keep trying to get in on my computer without messing this up?
I would stay where you are because hopefully the presentation on the screen will change and you'll still have your audio with your telephone. So that's where I'd stay right now.
I'm going to stay right here then, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Exactly. Good. Aside from the presenters and their three groups, are there any others that are on the call that would be monitoring, media or other interested parties? Could you identify yourself? Oh, they're muted. Okay, I got you. I've just been told that you're muted, so you're not able to do that. And we unmuted all of the presenters and the thing. Okay, good. All right. Well, again, apologies for doing it, but if we didn't do it this way, we would be losing valuable time as we go forward. We all talked about the fact that the first public meeting that we were going to have on Monday, April 20th, we were going to invite those that were interested from a social impact standpoint to be part of that presentation group. And there have been three that have been identified. And I'm going to start with Les Bernal, I guess it is. Les, if there's in your packet, there was a bio given. The title, his organization is Stop Predatory Gambling. It's a national network of individuals and groups with members of more than 1 million people. Les, if I may call you that, I don't know if you have others with you, but we would welcome you and just frankly ask the other two to stand ready, but we would encourage you to make this as impactful, but hopefully do it in a 15 or so minute time frame. And members of the panel, members of the study group, if you have questions during his presentation, Les, if you don't mind, I would say feel free to raise those just by unmuting and so doing. Les, is that format acceptable to you?
Sure. Our presentation was on the impression that we had roughly 30 minutes, but I'll do my best to keep it to kind of cut it down a bit.
I was also told that is this ALCAP's presentation?
ALCAP.
Oh, ALCAP did. Oh, I'm sorry. Baker has told me that ALCAP is the one that has brought us these speakers, and so we want to thank them, thank Bill for his efforts to do that. The 30 minutes will be inclusive of presentation as well as questions, and so if you would cover the salient points, and if there are questions, we would like to have that done either at the end or at the time they arise.
Absolutely. I understand. Thank you.
So Les, you're up. If you could just give us a 1 minute, where you are, who you represent, and what your position is, and things. The title of the presentation was Living in Truth, How State Lotteries Worsen Opportunity, Reduce Mobility Out of Property, and Deepen State Budget Problems. That's what I had been sent to me.
Excellent. Well, good morning to everyone. As I said, my name is Les Burnell. I'm the National Director for Stop Predatory Gambling, which is a national nonprofit 501c3 based in Washington, D.C. But I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and that's where I am this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you. I also want to just quickly acknowledge the work of Baker Allen in just organizing these logistics. I think that I've never participated in a public hearing with so many people on such an important issue like this, and I just think there's an enormous amount of logistics involved. I just want to acknowledge his work. I appreciate it. So the first slide that Baker has there is my opening slide. It's a picture, obviously the title of our talk today, but it's also, that's an actual advertisement that was done by the Washington, D.C. Lottery. And so that type of advertising that you see there is, has become the public voice of government today. We spend more than $2 billion a year, every year, collectively as state governments promoting marketing messages just like that one, encouraging people to buy lottery tickets. So I thought it was a very powerful image just to show, how lotteries are exempt from truth in advertising laws and how they take full advantage of that to try and encourage people to gamble. And the other thing I want to mention about my talk today is I particularly emphasized state lotteries more than I do the casino part of the issue today. There's a lot of overlap, and I will touch on the issue of local casinos, but my primary emphasis today will be on state lotteries, just because given the time constraints we have. So I briefly want to tell you how I got hooked on this issue. So Baker, if you can move to the next slide, please. So about 17 years ago now, I was working as a chief of staff in the Massachusetts Senate. I also used to be a college and high school basketball coach. I had never really thought about the issue of state-sanctioned gambling in my life. I grew up in the state of Massachusetts, where the lottery has been around my whole life. It was like the paint on the wall. I never questioned it. But I worked as a chief of staff in the Senate, and I worked for a senator who was opposed to casinos coming into my state. And I began to learn about the issue of government-sanctioned gambling. But it was really back in this period, 2004, where the New York Times Magazine sent a journalist to do a big story on slot machines. And the reporter, as part of the story, went out to the headquarters for IGT, which is the biggest slot machine maker in the United States. And he's walking around to all the different slot employees there as part of the story, and he's asking them, do you play the machines that you make? Okay, and to a person, none of them gambled. But this quote actually appeared in the story itself. And he went up to one final slot machine designer and said, do you play these slots? And this is the exact quote. He acted as if I had insulted him. Slots are for losers, he spat. And then, coming to his senses, begged me to consider that an off-the-record comment. Slots are for losers. That's what the people that make the slot machines think of their customers. And it's really, it's a great phrase to describe this whole public policy, an initiative, because it really is at its core a big con. And they regard people who participate in this as losers. And these are your neighbors. These are your, if you're in public life, these are your constituents. So that from then on, I really began to get hooked on this issue, and it really changed the arc of my life. So, and that's how the last 12 years I've been the leader of Stop Predatory Gambling, and we've gone all over the United States, highlighting what a major problem this is and how state-sanctioned gambling has become America's biggest, most neglected problem. So, Baker, if you could go to the next slide, please. So at the core of this issue, the reason why you're all here today, the reason why the governor created this gambling commission is at its core, what's the most urgent problem that you're looking to solve? Okay. And it's very easy when you look at the issue of state lotteries or local casinos, you lose track of like, what's the big picture here? What are we actually trying to achieve? What is the public policy motivation here? And what is that urgent problem? Okay. So with that, today in Alabama, okay, and this is from gobankingrates.com, and we have this data for all 50 states, but this is for Alabama's data. There's 45% of citizens have $0 in savings. Okay. 82% of Alabama citizens have less than $1,000 in savings. So when you have a financial crisis like the one that's happening now as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, this whole, financial fragility that so many Americans and so many Alabama citizens live on the edge of, it gets exposed. It comes up front and center of how fragile so many people live in our society. Okay, and this lack of savings is a major issue. Most people, if you're the hallmarks of an upper middle class life are, savings funds, stock funds, a housing fund, and so on. 80% of citizens virtually have none of that stuff, and that is really, you think about it, that's the problem. Like, that's the problem I think you're all trying to solve, and the governor and the legislators, like, how do we address this serious problem, economic problem that citizens face? So if you could move to the next slide, please, Baker. So with that, I'm going to focus on 4 truths about state lotteries. Okay, and these are 4 truths, regardless where people sit on, if they're big promoters of gambling or not. Like, these are 4 truths that are true regardless of where you sit on the spectrum. So truth number 1 is that state lotteries are a form of consumer financial fraud that cause life-changing financial losses for millions of citizens. Truth number 2 is that state lotteries are one of the root causes of the lack of mobility out of poverty and unfairness of opportunity that face millions of American families today. And truth number 3, our late lotteries today across the United States are blatantly trying to get kids to develop a gambling habit. And then the 4th truth is that you pay even if you don't play. The majority of citizens, and this is true for Alabama and elsewhere, they don't gamble. They may buy a ticket once a year, if that, but they end up paying higher taxes for less services and worse state budget problems over the long term. And they end up footing the bill for the inevitable budget deficits that state lotteries leave behind. So if you could please segue to the next slide, Baker. So let's flesh out truth number 1. State lotteries are a form of consumer financial fraud that cause life-changing financial losses. So what you're looking at here, this image, that's an actual scratch ticket. It's a $30 scratch ticket presently being sold in the state of Georgia. Okay, a $30 scratch ticket is being sold in some of the most low-income neighborhoods in that state. Okay, so here you have, just keep on. This is a government program that's selling these lottery tickets. Okay, so the one thing I like to flesh out is, this is kind of where you're dealing with local casinos or state lotteries, is I always kind of start at the base of this, is what separates commercialized gambling like lotteries and local casinos from every other business, including other vices like alcohol and tobacco. So what makes them different? At its core, they're a big con game that's based on financial fraud and exploitation. So you buy a lottery ticket, you put money into a slot machine. Citizens are conned into thinking they can win money on games that are literally designed to get you to lose your cash. If you go out, you pay for a pizza, you buy a ticket to a sporting event, perhaps you buy a glass of wine, that's what you receive in return. In the business of commercialized gambling, what you receive is a financial exchange. Okay, so whether it's state lotteries or local casinos, what they're marketing is a financial exchange. And that financial exchange offers a lure that you might win money. All right. And the financial exchange, though, is mathematically rigged against you so that you inevitably lose your money in the end. Okay. It's a mathematical certainty that the more you participate on whether it's casino gambling or state lotteries, you're going to lose your money. Okay. And so success only comes at someone else's expense. That's what makes it a form of fraud. It's similar to price gouging and false advertising. So in the report that we sent around that accompany our slides, we kind of get into very detailed examples of how state lotteries represent a form of consumer financial fraud. And you'll see a great graph in there because a lot of states put what's called video lottery gambling machines, which are essentially slot machines masked as so-called video lottery games. And that just shows the math. Like, it's about speed of play, frequency of play at higher and higher price points. And that's why states like Georgia sell $30 scratch tickets to get people to keep losing over and over again. And I think the key part of this fraud, consumer financial fraud, is that, like you saw in that ad that opened the first slide that I presented to you today, is that state-run lotteries, and this is true for local casinos as well, like they're exempt from truth in advertising laws under the Federal Trade Commission. They're exempt from truth in advertising laws. So they can market these gambling games unlike any other business can market themselves, okay? And the reason why the Federal Trade Commission has exempted them is they've delegated the power to regulate advertising to states, okay, to state governments. But the problem here is that state governments, they're the promoter, they're the partner. So when it comes to any other business, your state attorney general will be shutting down predatory business practices, exploitive practices. In this instance, everyone shields their eyes. So ads like the one you saw, marketing images like Martin Luther King to get citizens to buy lottery tickets. Those are the kind of business practices over and over again that occur with state lotteries. The business is about maximizing profits, not protecting the public interest. If you could move to the next slide, please, Baker. And I also want to say, actually, kind of related to this point, there's this perception that somehow like the casual lottery player, letting people buy, some tickets. I buy tickets a few times a year, as if that's the business model for state lotteries. The New York Times did a great story several years ago, quoting consumer research information done by state lotteries themselves that show between 70 to 80% of state lottery profits come from 10% of the people who play the lottery. So those states that are in the lottery business, it's all about the heavy player. The casual player is irrelevant to the revenue model. And that is true for local casinos as well. So it's all about the out of control player. So this next slide is we kind of refer to as truth number 2, all right? And that is that state lotteries are one of the root causes of the lack of mobility out of poverty and unfairness today in our country for millions of citizens. So, the Dave Ramsey show, which I personally am a big fan of, I listen to him regularly. I'm sure all of you know him as a very nationally famous personal finance expert. His radio program is the 5th most downloaded podcast. Okay. And why is that? Why is that? Why of all the things all the content that's in society today, why would his program be the 5th most downloaded podcast? That's because tens of millions of people, including hundreds of thousands of people in Alabama, are broke. We started this conversation off that, 45% of citizens in Alabama don't have zero in savings. And that 82% of citizens in Alabama don't have $1,000. Okay, so people are broke. Okay, so how do lotteries play into this? All right, the issue here is state lotteries, instead of encouraging people to build numbers up, okay, and build up assets, saving money and buy a house, a college fund for your kids, retirement funds. State lotteries represent the complete opposite of what savings or building assets is all about. It's about losing money on games that are literally designed to get you to lose your cash. People always say, well, Les, gambling and investing in the stock market are the same thing. And absolutely not. They're completely different. Investing in the stock market certainly has an element of risk. But if you put $1,000 into a Standard & Poor's 500 index fund over 20 years, that $1,000 is going to grow and grow and grow. Usually over the course of that period, probably 10% over that period, with some ups and downs, of course. But you're going to make money, okay, in the long term. You're going to build assets. Try spending $1,000 on those $30 scratch tickets you saw that the state of Georgia selling, and how much money you think you'd end up if you bought $1,000 worth of $30 scratch tickets. You'd end up with zero in the long term. You'd end up with zero. Okay, so that's part of this idea of if you're serious about helping people get out of poverty, it's not just how much you make, it's how much you keep. And so we do not encourage people. The idea that states are encouraging people, the people that need to be building assets the most, we encouraging these folks with these deceptive ads to lose this cash on rigged games. You know, it's an incredible injustice. All right, and to put real numbers on this, you know, we all have these other ideas on how we're going to improve, you know, poverty and expand the middle class. You know, we're going to lower taxes for businesses. We're going to, you know, well, some folks will say, oh, let's raise taxes on billionaires. You know, we're going to raise the minimum wage. We have all these different proposals out there, but none of them are at their core are a consequential fix. Okay, but think about this: over the next 8 years, the American people are on course to lose more than $1 trillion of personal wealth to government-sanctioned gambling. More than $1 trillion of personal wealth to state government-sanctioned gambling. At least half of that personal wealth, which is $500 billion, is going to be lost on state lotteries. Okay, so I took last night, I spent a couple hours and I went through the South Carolina annual reports for their state lottery since they enacted it in 2003. And I picked South Carolina because they roughly have the same population size as Alabama. So over the last 18 years or so, or 17 years, the people of South Carolina have lost $7.6 billion of personal wealth to the South Carolina lottery. So if you think about that, if Alabama had passed the lottery back in 1999, when the gambling forces were trying to do it again back then, you know, and you enacted it, you would have lost. Those numbers would be comparable. Essentially, the people of Alabama today have at least $7.6 billion of more of personal wealth in their daily lives, in their communities, in their businesses, than they would have if they had passed the lottery 20 years ago. So your state is $7.6 billion wealthier than it would have been. So that's breathtaking. There's not another other policy reform that would have put that kind of money back into people's hands. So even though for all the financial problems, you know, our country faces, all these different states face, and our citizens, Alabama is in a better position today because you don't have a lottery in your state. And so people often say, well, Les, it's not, if you have the lottery directors on here, they'll say, well, we don't target poor folks. You know, it's middle-class people play and so on. In that briefing paper I presented you, I went overboard with the amount of information of detail to give you, just to show what utter nonsense that is. It's not true. When a business practice is dishonest, the people that stand to benefit from it talk about it dishonestly. And so there's an unlimited amount of information here to show how the business practices that state lotteries use and who they target, who they're going after. And because overwhelmingly, the information is clear. We're actually, coincidentally, in the Wall Street Journal today. The Wall Street Journal has a big story about an initiative that we're doing, calling on governors in states that have lotteries to close the lotteries for 30 days while these relief checks, the economic relief checks, are hitting people's mailboxes. Because overwhelmingly, the facts show that people, particularly low-income people, play the lottery to change their financial condition. That's why they're playing. They're not playing just for some fun, okay? That's how the lotteries try to market it, to assuage the concerns that the 2/3 of the public who never gambles and who's outraged to see these business practices. They always say, oh, it's all fun. We're just doing it for fun. The people are playing the lottery to change their financial future, to pay their rent at the end of the month, you know, to pay their health care bills. So that, and playing a rigged game, you know, a con. Okay. If you could please move to the next slide. Truth number 3, okay? Lotteries are blatantly trying to get kids to develop a gambling habit. So anyone, I'm 50 years old now, and so those of you, if you're my age or older, you remember the big, lawsuits and so on that state attorney generals across the United States took aim at the big tobacco companies for marketing to kids back in the early 90s, okay, using the iconic cartoon character of Joe Camel. So here's an image contrasting an ad that tobacco companies use to target, using Joe Campbell, a cartoon-like figure, to get kids hooked on smoking. And here's an actual lottery ticket. And this is actually from the state of Massachusetts, but you'll see these types of lottery tickets everywhere, okay? Using Frosty the Snowman, okay, to market lottery tickets. Like, who do you think the demographic is for that? We talk about conditioning, like, younger people aren't playing the lottery, and so the state lotteries are going out of their way to make state lotteries attractive to young people. So they use all kinds of cartoon-like figures, to push these gambling games on people. All right, so that's an actual. Just the contrast is breathtaking. So, in the next slide here, Baker, if you can move to it, please. Here's, in preparation for this presentation, I went on the Georgia Lottery website, okay, which offers online gambling games to the citizens of Georgia. All right, this is a screenshot of the types of online gambling games that a government program, Georgia Lottery is a government program pushing online gambling games to kids that are so-called free to play. So you start out with, you got to be free to play these games. And then once they get you hooked, then they start playing for money. But look at the images that they put. Like, who do you think they're targeting with these games? And the state attorney general and so on in these states, like, this isn't unique to Georgia. All these states, this is the future for them to get kids hooked on gambling. Look, it's breathtaking. And there's no one regulates any of this. No one shuts any of this stuff down. So why would Alabama open their kids up to this kind of predatory marketing to get kids hooked on gambling? It's outrageous. And that's what the visuals tell it all. Right, Baker, if you could please move to the next slide. So lastly here, the fourth truth is, and this applies to casinos as well, some people say, oh, we need the money. This is going to pay for all these things. Why don't we keep the money here and so on? What you pay, even if you don't play. The independent research consistently shows that the majority of citizens who don't gamble, you end up paying higher taxes for less services, and it worsens state budget deficits. All you have to do is look at the states that have become big-time predatory gambling states. Illinois, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Jersey. These states are in the worst financial condition of any states in the United States because they rely on a budget gimmick, okay? State-sanctioned gambling is the ultimate budget gimmick, okay? So, you'll hear people with a big push for this. They'll say, well, let's try to keep this money in state. They're all going over the line to Georgia and all these other places. And we kind of break this argument down in the report, pretty clearly. I show what a con it is. It's part of the con messaging is people going over, you are losing money on this. You bring this into your state. As we said, we compared those South Carolina numbers. The people of South Carolina lost $7.5 billion of personal wealth to their state lottery. Okay, you're not losing $7.5 billion of wealth to neighboring states. Your citizens are better financially for not having a lottery. Okay, the idea that it addresses budget problems. It's the calling card of anti-reform politicians across the country. So, and I put this report on. This is the Blinken report out of the State University of New York, Rockefeller Institute. They do in the past have done the best research in the country around government revenues from gambling. And now the woman that did this report, she is now at the Urban Institute. Her name's Lucy Dedayan. So don't take my word for it. You invite Lucy down to present before your commission and get the facts about, do revenues from gambling really deliver what people say they do? It's dishonest. The only people who push this are the gambling lobbyists. You can move to the next slide, please. And so let's take a quick look here at the Georgia Lottery, because you hear a lot about that, right? They're going out of state. Let's take a look at your neighboring state. right now in FY 218, the people of Georgia lost $1.8 billion of personal wealth to the Georgia lottery. That's almost $3,500 a minute that those citizens are losing. Okay, and over the last 20 years, your neighboring state, the citizens there have lost $30 billion of personal wealth. Okay, without adding any new forms of gambling into Georgia, because right now in Georgia, they're trying to, the gambling lobbyists are pushing for casinos. They're on track to lose more than $9.2 billion of their personal wealth over the next 5 years without anything new. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. And here is just a quick summary of a truthful look at the Georgia lottery. And these are excerpts from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution story. Has the Hope Scholarship Program delivered? Clearly, I'm not going to read this to you because it's self-evident. It hasn't. It's redistributing money from poor citizens who play the lottery to high-achieving middle-class and upper-class students. It's the American dream in reverse. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Similar, more facts about who plays, how the lottery hasn't delivered. The middle-class families who benefited from the Hope Scholarship, they just put that money, bought themselves cars. I mean, that's what the studies show. Okay, it hasn't delivered as they promised. It's part of the con. Next slide, please. So the last argument I want to leave you with, actually, there's two last quick arguments I want to leave you with. One is people say, you have these legislators who say, well, my constituents want to vote on this, right? Let's vote on this. First of all, the argument that people are going to vote on this, if there's any kind of fair vote, okay, what they're saying is when gambling lobbyists say, let the people vote, what they're really saying is, let us buy the vote. All right. In the packet I gave you, part of the con, part of the fraud that people lobby for this, it shows that this idea that somehow you're going to have a fair vote in Alabama just by saying, well, listen, I'm personally against the state lottery, but, I think my constituents should be able to vote on it. The gambling lobbyists, the people who stand to benefit financially from having a state lottery or casinos in your state, they're going to spend several $1 million on paid advertising through social media, television advertising, radio advertising to push some messaging. Most of the time it doesn't even show lottery tickets or casinos. They're going to say, hey, send your kid to college, pass the lottery, or look, reduce your property taxes, pass a lottery. I mean, who's going to say, if I'm not going to get it, who's going to counter those arguments with that kind of spending? So I always love to say to legislators, if you're outspent 3-1 on your reelection campaign, you'd be hard pressed to win reelection. Okay, no matter your merits. But imagine being outspent like 1,000-1. Okay, and then it's virtually impossible. And that's what's to win. You can't win when you're being outspent with that kind of resources. And that's what you're talking about in Alabama. So this argument that you're going to let the people vote, it's dishonest, and it's blatantly dishonest, and it's part of the fraud that the gambling lobbyists are trying to push over onto the people. And the last thing I just wanted to add is that there's a fifth truth that I didn't add to this because it applies to lotteries, but it especially applies to casinos. And the fifth truth about government-sanctioned gambling is that the people who promote casinos and state lotteries, the people who financially benefit from them, they don't gamble themselves. Okay, it's the only commercialized gambling is the only product or service in the country where the people that own it and promote it don't use it. Okay, so that is the best example of the fraud. As we kick this conversation off, the IGT slot machine makers call their customers losers. The CEO of MGM told the New York Times he doesn't gamble. Okay, Steve Wynn told 60 Minutes, the only way you win in a casino is to own it. Okay, we have a list on our website. It's on the homepage. We call it the Hypocrite Hall of Fame. So over the last 15 years, we've collected all of the acknowledgments, the self-admissions of government officials, of gambling operators who have publicly acknowledged that they don't gamble. But it's great for your family to do it, right? It's great for your community to have a casino. But me, listen, I got my money in stocks. I got my kids a college fund. I own a house. But you should be losing. You should be spending your money on $30 scratch tickets. You should be spending your money on slot machines. it's a con. So that's the final truth is it's the only product or service where the people that own it and promote it don't use it. It's the Hypocrite Hall of Fame. So I urge you to check it out on our homepage. It's right above the fold. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today.
First of all, thanks, Les. Very compelling information. Let me just ask the study group, you have any questions or any comments relative to his presentation? You have his presentation in your electronic package along the way for further review. Any comments or any questions from the group? We're hearing none. Thank you, Les, so much. Welcome to stay on the call. We have 2 more presentations, and I appreciate the fact that you have adhered to the 30 minutes. We very much appreciate that so much, and we wish Massachusetts the very best in your efforts. I understand that you guys have just now begun to get some of the coronavirus hitting your community. So our best wishes are with you.
Thank you.
Okay, the second presentation is by John, is it Kent? Kind?
It's Kent, as in kindergarten.
Kindergarten, good. MBA, JD, LLM, SJD, Professor Emeritus of Business and Legal Policy at the University of Illinois. His title is Commercialized Sports Betting Severely Harms Kids and Will Radically Change the Way That Alabama Children and Families Consume Sports. So with that, John, again, we apologize for this venue, but it's the best we can do given the circumstances, because otherwise we would just be dead in the water, and we didn't want to be dead in the water because this is such an important issue, and the governor's asked us to do something by the end of the year. So with that, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation. Same ground rules if you would.
Well, thank you. I assume you can hear me okay.
Yes.
I actually submitted a 15-page, I know that's a little bit long statement, and I did change the title slightly. And the title I changed it to was Electronic and Sports Gambling Are Causing 10% of Kids to Become Gambling Addicts and Will Radically Change the Way That Alabama Children and Families Interface with Sports. I want to thank the honorable members of the legislature and the governor's study group. I also want to thank your staff for their technical expertise in helping getting this going, particularly Baker Allen. And appreciate your invitation to testify before you today. I'll just say next when I want the next item to show on the screen. This is actually for those of you who on the commission who are attorneys. I hope you will go through my statement, because it's actually modified from the statement that I made here before the Judiciary Committee back in 2018, or I should say my prepared statement. And it's full of blue book citations documenting not just what I'm going to say here today, but actually documenting everything that Mr. Les Bernal just said. I listened closely to his presentation here, and I didn't hear a misstatement at all. He is 100% supported by the academic facts in his presentation to the committee today. As I was listening to some of the initial comments before we got started, I noticed some confusion about terminology involving gaming and gambling. And that's not unusual, because the industry has spent hundreds of millions of dollars confusing the public, confusing decision makers, confusing lawmakers. And therefore, it's been nice that the US Congress has been actually pretty forward thinking in looking at these types of issues. And particularly with regard to sports gambling, this was a committee hearing that was scheduled September 27 of 2018 before the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations. Now, the name of the committee itself should tell you the importance of gambling types of issues to the socioeconomics of the United States and of the individual 50 states. If I could have the next, please, next, thank you. Now, this was the original witness list. There were 5 of us, and I would point out that I happened to be the only professor called to testify, and I think that was because it was on behalf of the University of Illinois, which is interdisciplinary and has a long history as a Tier 1 research university, and for looking at these types of issues and documenting them by means of academics. Now, I should point out that literally, about 36 hours, 24 hours before this hearing, my office received so many phone calls from social action groups, from religious groups, and others complaining, as you look at this congressional hearing witness list, all the others are lobbyists. I was the only professor, the only academic. Everyone else on here was a lobbyist in favor of gambling. And so I actually contacted the chair of the subcommittee, James Sensenbrenner, as well as the chair of the Judiciary Committee, overall Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte, and asked if we could have a substitute, or there could be a substitute for my position in academia by a counter voice showing the other side of the issues from a socioeconomic standpoint. And the person selected was Mr. Les Bernal. And Mr. Bernal, I sat behind him and the other witnesses at this hearing. And again, he made a very forceful presentation. And I think really not just countered, but showed the total fallacy of the arguments being made by the lobbyists in favor of gambling. But they have so much money that they have literally tried to corrupt the academic institutions, the media. They are a very powerful organization. They don't rely as an industry on the facts. Next, please. Now, this is a amicus curiae brief, which was presented to the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of Murphy v. NCAA. Now, I won't go into all the background on Murphy v. NCAA, but this was a case that started in the state of New Jersey as a test case, promoted actually by the state of Illinois and the state of New Jersey. And it lost, they tried to get sports gambling, and it lost in the lower court. They were actually trying to overturn the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. It lost in the federal district court. It lost on appeal. The state of New Jersey passed some new legislation. They brought the case again. It lost in the district court. It lost in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. They appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Solicitor General's office advised the U.S. Supreme Court, do not take this case. The Supreme Court went ahead and took it anyway, and then passed the so-called Murphy decision, which actually was originally brought by Governor Christie of New Jersey. This case, Murphy v. NCAA, is now being used to, quote unquote, justify the passing of states with sports gambling legislation, including daily fantasy sports and other types of nuances. The goal of the industry is to simply put gambling real-time gambling 24/7. This is the business model. Real-time 24/7 internet gambling, sports gambling, electronic gambling on every cell phone, and particularly directed toward kids. And kids are particularly susceptible, and as I indicated in the title to my written testimony here, or prepared statement, that the national statistics show that 4 to 12%, approximately 10% at this point, of young people are addicted or problem gamblers. Now, I've heard social and religious presenters indicate this is and I'm not a minister by any at all, but I've heard the presentation being cited as a 10% tithe of children to the idols of gambling. And I think that's a very potent type of statement that people are starting to recognize. But notice the people on this, or the groups on this particular amicus curiae brief to the U.S. Supreme Court. You've got the Center for Popular Democracy, Christian Coalition of America, Concerned Women for America, Faith and Freedom Coalition, the Islamic Society of North America, National Association of Evangelicals, Public Good Law Center, Public Health Advocacy Institute, the Alabama Citizens Action Program. You've got the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. You've got, and there were many other groups that were trying to get onto this amicus curiae brief, but my understanding is that they missed the deadline. If I could have the next, please. But I would also point out that Congressman Frank Wolf read into the congressional record 220 or over 220 social and religious groups, bipartisan, who were against the spread of gambling, and that includes lotteries here in the United States. And these were some of the attachments that I had for my prepared statement in 2018 before the Congressional Committee. And again, I surrendered my seat to Mr. Les Bernal. And I think from his previous presentation, as I indicated, you can see why. He does an excellent job. Next, please. Newsweek gets it. The gambling industry business model, they know that the future are kids. They are putting so-called games, which are really gambling, play for free, but they're trying to establish a large database of kids, draw them in. They know where their future is. And there are efforts in Washington now, particularly by the U.S. Justice Department and the new U.S. Attorney General, William Barr, to reinstate the Wire Act, which would involve protecting kids from this online gambling. Next, please. We'll go a little faster now. Here's, to reiterate what Mr. Bernal said, here's Martin Luther King Day speech in the Chicago Sun-Times by Jesse Jackson, and he calls lotteries, quote unquote, the new chains of slavery. Next, I think that says it all. Next. Here we have a little cartoon. And by the way, I included these as attachments to my congressional statement. This is, of course, Governor Christie talking about all of his great revenue ideas, nothing but gambling. And you see sports gambling up there in the corner. Next, please. This is a no-brainer. This goes back 25 years, but it's still relevant today. 40 economists against more gambling. Can you get 40 economists to agree on anything? Well, they agree on this. This just doesn't work. It's not basic economics. It violates every basic economic and good government principle. Next, please. Now, they had a presentation, and this is related more to casinos, but it does leverage into the other types of gambling areas. They had a racetrack called Exarban in Omaha, Nebraska. It's going broke. What's going to save the racetrack? Well, let's make it into a casino. Gambling, gambling, gambling. Gambling's always the solution for everything. Well, Howard Buffett, Warren Buffett, who you all have heard about, said, this isn't good economics. The mayor of Omaha said, this is not good economics. They basically bulldozed down the racetrack, said, we're not going to build a casino here. They started building townhouses, entertainment centers, restaurants, and here's a great irony. They have now built there the new University of Nebraska Business School is on the site of the old projected casino. Next, please. That's economic development, and it's $1 billion economic development. When you go to gambling, you're not just losing personal wealth out of the public, you're losing jobs. Here's the Retailers Association of Australia, which is complaining that they've lost 303,000 new retail jobs. Well, they're about 5 times the size of Alabama. So Alabama can lose a projected, 60,000 jobs per year as people dump their money into gambling. They're not buying consumer goods. Next, please. And education. Here's an op-ed that I did, not just printed in the News Gazette, which is the largest newspaper in Central Illinois, but also in other papers. And I've served for over 40 years as a faculty elected member of the University of Illinois Faculty Senate, as well as their representative elected again to the state university retirement system. And the gambling interests who say that the lotteries are going to save education are now raiding the education funds and trying to raid and are effectively reducing the funding to education and threatening the pension of Illinois public employees. Teachers in Alabama and elsewhere need to see what's gone on in other states and how instead of helping education, these lotteries are in fact hurting educational funding. Next, please. Here's the Academic Senate at the University of Illinois. You can read through this. They get the message. They are against these slot machines, electronic gambling. All the students are being targeted. Next, please. Here's the Student Senate resolution. It says the same thing. Quit targeting us. People say, well, students love to gamble. Well, only unenlightened students are. Intelligent students are saying this is not workable. They get the message at the University of Illinois. Next, please. And this is just another example. In Atlantic City, the Rebel Casino, a $2 billion casino, is going bankrupt. So what's their solution? Good old Governor Christie and the legislature actually entertained proposals to take the $300 million pension gamble out of the teachers' retirement fund to invest in a $2 billion bankrupt casino. Fortunately, that failed, at least fortunately for the teachers. Next, please. Governor Quinn, one of our former governors from Illinois, half of our governors in the last 50 years have been indicted or gone to jail, and every one of them had an interface with the gambling industry. That may not be why they went to jail, but they did have this corruptive interface. And so Governor Quinn, one of our good governors, has called for the new untouchables. People aren't going to be influenced by the money that this enormous amounts of money, lobbying dollars that the gambling industry has. Next, please. People say, well, this is going to regulate gambling. Here's an organized crime mob boss. They're running their video gambling empires from jail. Front page of the Sun-Times, Sunday. Next, please. This is a current cartoon. I believe this was from the Chicago Trib. And this is City Hall in Chicago. And, you know, a cartoon sometimes is worth 1,000 words. It shows where things are going in the state of Illinois. Next, please. Oh, and I remember your former Attorney General combining with the Attorney General of Florida, Bob Butterworth, in the Seminole case they took to the U.S. Supreme Court to keep the tribes from going everywhere in the state of Alabama. But the more gambling you have, the more likely it is that the tribes are going to come in and spread everywhere. And you're not going to get any tax revenues. There are multiple problems involved. Here's the cover story from Time Magazine. This story was so good, and they had so many stories in it, it was actually republished and sent around to every member of Congress by Time Magazine, I believe. Next, please. Audit report, U.S. Department of Interior. I know this is 1993, but it just showed, this was one of their first reports, and it showed that in the tribal gambling, I believe it was 94% of the tribal gambling operations were in violation of federal law. 94%. Next, please. And that hasn't changed. Here's the U.S. News and World Report talking about being able to regulate this on tribal lands. Next, please. This is out of Emory Law School, talking about the increased bankruptcies you can anticipate. Les Bernal has touched upon that. People are losing their money in gambling instead of investing it. Next, please. Here's another law school one talking about, are the games fair? And are there RICO situations? Both of these last two law review articles were lead articles. So the law students get it. Next, please. And talking about the mega lawsuits involving tobacco cases. This is out of Emory Economics Journal. And the costs of addicted gamblers are going to impact your state as they have other states. And we'll explore a little bit of those costs in a minute. Next, please. This is out of the Business Law Journal. It goes all the way back to 1994. We did an analysis of what brings businesses into your state. Gambling is a job killer. Gambling is keep Fortune 500 companies out of your state. And that has certainly happened in the state of Illinois and has confirmed publication from 1994. Next, please. Corruption has gone through the roof in Illinois. We're one of the most corrupt states in the country, and a large portion of that is related directly to gambling interests and the enormous amount of money that is there. Next, please. I mean, just watch the Martin Scorsese movies. 44% of Chicagoans, polls say, want to get out. And where are they coming? They're coming to Alabama. They're coming to Georgia as less gambling or non-gambling states. Next, please. Now, all of this is confirmed in a 1990 report called the National Gambling Impact Study Commission. University of Illinois, our offices were listed on page 1 of the sources of information in this. This commission included gambling people on it, as well as some anti-gambling and neutral commissioners. And when it was finally concluded, all of the neutral commissioners became anti-gambling. So hopefully, as you go through all of this, you will see the facts and concur with the Congressional National Gambling Impact Study Commission, which was supported by, I believe, virtually your entire U.S. congressional delegation. Next, please. And as part of that commission, I would also indicate that they called for a moratorium, not just on casinos, but on the expansion of any type of gambling anywhere in the United States. You see in the first line there, they say it was a 5-4 vote on that. The 4 were the casino owners and gambling interests, but all the neutrals and the formed the 5-4 vote on that. And I would point out that they were very negative on sports gambling, very negative on internet gambling. As a matter of fact, there were 4 recommendations involving internet gambling. All 4 of those recommendations said, keep gambling off the internet, keep it criminalized under the Wire Act and other acts. Next, please. Here are just some of the, these were actually presented to the commission and talking about what happens when you bring gambling into your jurisdiction. They were referring to Las Vegas here, which is constantly saying, well, look at all the economic progress in Las Vegas, but look at all of the socioeconomic costs in Las Vegas as well. And again, this was presented at one of the commission hearings, and I and my colleagues happened to be at this particular hearing. Next, please. And we also testified under oath before the commission. Next, please. This is a publication. You can see on the right, it just takes one bookkeeper to destroy a multi-million-dollar company and throw all these people out of work. She embezzled from the company, lost millions of dollars at the casinos nearby, and that was the end of this consumer company. Next, please. You've heard the examples of Mr. Bernal regarding Georgia. Here again is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution talking about all the kids who are getting hooked on gambling and that's before it's gotten as sophisticated as it is today. This goes all the way back to 1996. Next, please. And you can see some of the statistics here from their investigation in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and by Georgia State University. Next, please. The combination of daily fantasy sports, pornography tend to go hand in hand. The largest porn giant in the country has wanted to bail out daily fantasy sports in various venues. Next. And as we mentioned before, U.S. Attorney General William Barr and his colleagues, not him in particular, but the U.S. Justice Department is trying to reinstate the Wire Act. They've given gambling operators 90 days to comply. At this point, this was last year, and the gambling industry has tied up everything in litigation, trying to roll back the Justice Department and not allow them to enforce the Wire Act as previously interpreted. Next, please. Loot boxes have become a problem. It's another avenue for the gambling interests to try and get kids into gambling. Next, please. And finally, just to let you know, we have multiple books out from the University of Illinois. We've got dozens and dozens of professors from across the country. We've worked with colleagues in Alabama, Georgia, and across the South. As a matter of fact, we just moved our retirement home to Georgia. And in part, as I indicated before, people are leaving Illinois and other jurisdictions which have all this gambling, which is dominating everything. And this shows five of our volumes. There's a 6th volume out, and there are more volumes ready to go. Thousands and thousands of pages of government reports, economic reports, saying, why are we even discussing this? Why are we even having this commission? Why have another study group gambling commission? We've had 30 years of congressional hearings, documents, people trying to shut down the gambling industry because it's really not an industry. It hurts consumerism. And particularly now with the COVID-19, the smartest thing states could do is simply shut down their lotteries, and that would be a huge multi-billion-dollar influx of monies back into their consumer economies. But instead, they're going to online gambling. Online lotteries are going to more and more and more online gambling. They're desperate. They tend to lose billions of dollars. They're desperate. They're going online. They're pushing for online and internet gambling in various types, and it's just going to get worse and worse. The best thing you can do is just simply say no. Next, please. This is just one of the annual social costs per pathological gambler. You put this stuff online, your children will get hooked. Kids, they're getting hooked. And this is an older template that shows the different costs. Those costs have gone up in the last 15 years in different jurisdictions. And the social costs per pathological gambler, for every $1 in revenues you might get, are at least $3 to $7 in increased crime as people lose their money, increased bankruptcies as people lose their money, and increased addictions. Addictions double, and children are being targeted, young people are being targeted. This is a huge socioeconomic problem. And finally, the last one is just a reference to Mr. Les Bernal again. Kudos to him and his group. He does a great job at getting out some of the political and governmental necessary facts. But his group is very reputable. And I just wanted to assure people on this commission that we have dozens of tier 1 research university academic reports, dozens of congressional reports under oath. By the way, when we're talking before Congress and in many other venues, including before the U.S. National Gambling Impact Study Commission, we're all testifying under oath. So when I say that my colleagues and I have indicated that the costs, social costs, are $3 to $7 to government, and some say even more. For every $1 in new revenue, we're under oath. And when we testify before Congress and elsewhere, and the lobbyists show up for the gambling industry, it's just amazing how their numbers change. And most of their numbers become pablum or irrelevant when they have to testify under oath. But when they testify under oath, when my academic colleagues and I, you can rely on these numbers that we've given to you today and that are extremely well documented in academic journals. And my last comment would be that the gambling industry has tried hard to create their own journals, their own groups, give them the color of credibility to counter the academic and government facts. So please be very careful, because they've certainly been successful in confusing the press and confusing many decision makers who are trying to act in good faith with regard to what is actually occurring with this spread of gambling throughout our society. Thank you for your kind attention. You all have been extremely courteous. I know I've gone a little bit long here, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them. I went through things pretty quickly, but again, I just want to assure you that this is all extremely well documented and that you are on solid ground with the academics, regardless of what you might hear coming in from the industry and their so-called research groups.
John, we thank you. It is well documented. We've not actually heard from the industry group that you referred to. Purposely, we wanted the first public hearings or public opportunities to be from those that are on the social side of the equation. I'm sure at some point in time we will hear from the others, and we have this information. Are there any questions or any comments that you might have for John?
Todd, this is Young Boozer. Let me ask him to expound on something. You mentioned in your presentation, gambling keeps businesses out of the state. Could you be more specific on the reasons for that?
Well, I would refer you to that 1994 article in the Miami Business Law Review. And basically, after the casinos first came to Illinois in 1989, 1990, 1991, they were up and running. And my colleagues and I were approached about how do we attract consumer businesses? Will gambling interests help our economy? And basically, we were approached by the governor, one of the few who hasn't gone to jail. And this was my particular contribution to that effort, although other colleagues were involved. And we cited to the University of New Orleans and other studies that showed that when Fortune 500 companies are considering where do they locate, well, the CEOs are not, to make it relatively simple, CEOs are not naive. They don't want to locate, they know about these social costs. It's like drug addiction. So if you think about government perpetrated drug addiction, that's gambling addiction. And if I've got 10,000 people in my workforce, I've already got alcohol problems, I've already got HR problems involving drugs. Do I want to locate in an area where I know that another 100 or 500 of my employee workforce are going to have problem or addicted gambling types of problems? And so that's a major factor. Fortune 500 companies don't want to locate in high crime areas. They don't want to locate in high gambling areas. As a matter of fact, in that law review, if you read through it, I cite to, I believe, Governor Mike Leavitt of Utah, who said, was advertising at the time saying, we're number 2 in new job creation, we're number 3 or so in attracting new businesses. And the reason is we're a non-gambling state here in Utah, and we never will be a gambling state. So non-gambling states have an attraction that gambling states don't. I mean, who wants to move their family to Las Vegas? Who wants to move their family to Atlantic City? What Fortune 500 company wants to, other than a casino company, wants to move to Atlantic City, and which is basically a dozen casinos inside a slum. Nobody wants their employee workforce to be located in that kind of an environment if you have an option. And the other thing is, you want to have a government like Illinois, which is dominated by gambling lobbyists. And let me just give you a quick example. The first 10 casinos that came to Illinois, the casino licenses had a Wall Street value of $500 million each. You could have marketed those casino licenses for $500 million. That would have been $5 billion into the treasury of the state of Illinois. The gambling lobbyists were so powerful that they got those licenses for $25,000 apiece. A total ripoff of $5 billion of the taxpayer money in Illinois, which is one reason why the state of Illinois is one of the most bankrupt as well as the most corrupt states in the country. We have, for our pensions and our education system, we have over $150 billion in unfunded liabilities that are owed to our pensioners and to our education people and to our public employees. Well, there have been these huge multi-billion-dollar giveaways to the gambling interests. And of course, they love Illinois. And Illinois is not the only state. half of the U.S. states, according to my colleagues in government, are now dominated by gambling interests. That you know,
I need for you to wrap up, John.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I need you to wrap up. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Todd,
you for that.
Mayor Strange, I just have one real quick question, and that is, what's the name of the case that's pending in relationship to the Wire Act?
It's in the New Jersey. I'm sorry, was it New Hampshire? It's in my statement, I believe.
Okay.
Is the actual citation or the Blue Book presentation. It's now on appeal by the Justice Department to the First U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals.
That's not the Murphy case, though.
No, that's
Yeah. Okay.
no, that's the Wire Act. Basically, in 2011, well, if you read through my statement, you'll see the improprieties that occurred, which allowed the non-enforcement of the Wire Act. And
Baker will get that and get it to you.
I can find it from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, John, thank you so much for this. Obviously, it's a passionate subject, and you're well versed on it, and we appreciate it so much. We're going on to the Jack Gallicini and Roger Olson, but I want to again thank Joe Godfrey Alcap for arranging some of these presentations, if not all of them. So with that, Jack, I'll ask you to come forward. The Problem Gambling, the Hidden Addiction, Jack Gallicini, who's president of the Alabama Council on Compulsive Gambling, and Reverend Roger Olson, the Resource Development Coordinator for the Alabama Council on Compulsive Gambling. And just to give Jack Gallicini an additional bio, many of you know who Ronald McDonald is in your respective areas, but for many years in the central Alabama, if not a larger area, Jack Gallicini was Ronald McDonald here, and he was fondly remembered by many kids who will come up to him today and say, "Oh, I knew you when you were Ronald McDonald." So Jack, welcome to the group. Jack? Roger, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear Roger, but I don't know
Can
what
you hear
Jack
me?
is. Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay, good.
I don't know where Jack is, though.
Mr. Gallicini, are you on the line? We're showing you on and your line unmuted.
Yes, Jack.
Jack, you're gonna have to get close to the mic. We can't hear you. No.
Is your phone unmuted?
And do you have it on speaker? Jack? Roger.
Yes.
Obviously, you're not with Jack, right?
No, we're in separate offices here in the building.
Right.
Okay, Jack is on his way up to my office. He'll be
Okay.
here
If you want
just momentarily.
to start, he can join us with your
Problem is
presentation.
his slides, Mr. Mayor, his slides here at the beginning belong to him. I will tell you real quickly that we've been in business. We've been here serving the community and the great people of Alabama since July of 2012. And we are 100% neutral on gambling. So now here to take it over is Mr. Gallicini.
Hey, Jack.
You hear me now, Todd? Okay, well, we want to thank you, Todd, and also thank Baker for all the work that you've done and for the invitation to be with us today. You can go to the second slide there, Baker. Of course, but now we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization, and we are the official affiliate for the National Council on Problem Gambling. And as Roger had mentioned, we're totally gambling neutral. The message we get out is the fact that if you are going to be a gambler, try to gamble responsibly. If you can't, we're here to be able to give you the help that you need. Next slide. The American Psychiatric Association has designated gambling as an addiction, and we call it a hidden addiction because obviously with alcohol and drugs, they're very visible. Gambling's kind of invisible. As an example, for about $14 in money, you can buy enough alcohol or liquor to become legally drunk. For probably about $30, you can be buying drugs. And these are two types of addictions that if you're sitting next to a person, you can tell if they're drunk or you can tell if they're on drugs. With gambling, you don't realize the fact that a person has got a problem until all the money is gone. So we do say the term that gambling is a disorder that knows no border. Go to the next slide, Baker, please.
Thank you.
Okay, when we look at gambling, there's a thing called the thrill of the win. From a simple door prize to mega millions for problem gambling, the thrill never leaves. And that's the problem. If many of you have ever bid on something, you're kind of getting exciting to see, was I the person that won even a little door prize? We want to see if we're the win. You get the little bit of a thrill. The person that has a problem with gambling, that thrill never leaves. So it doesn't become about always the money, but it becomes the problem of the thrill of gambling. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, when we talk about the fact of who gambles, you know, virtually everyone gambles. Now, when I put on that top bullet point, even a Kiwanis Club, this is a true story. Roger and I addressed the Kiwanis Club during Problem Gambling Month. When I opened up my remarks, I asked the poor people in the audience, how many of you are gamblers? Raise your hand. Well, just a couple of hands went up. But then I said, because that Kiwanis Club had a basket in front where you could put $1 in to win a door prize that went for scholarships, the next question was, well, how many of you put $1 in the collection basket today for the scholarships? Well, just about half the room raised their hand. And that was probably at least about 60 or 70 people. So I went to show the fact that a lot of times we don't think about something as being gambling when it actually is. And as both John and Les talked about earlier in their presentations, that second bullet point, kids start with video games and they start at an early age with gambling. Fortnite is one example. It'll really talk about how kids can get started. And as John was talking about in one of his slides that he showed, there's a thing called the loot box. If the kid is playing Fortnite and he wants to enhance his chances of winning, he can buy with money the loot box. When he opens it up, that'll either give him what he needs to win the game, or guess what? Maybe you lose and you have to buy another loot box to get more. So they start at a very early age. In the state of Alabama, because obviously we're here in Alabama, there are more veterans per capita than any state in the union. Military people have retired and stayed in Alabama. Well, that's the good news. But along the same lines, some of these military people are experiencing gambling problems also. We're working in conjunction with the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs to kind of address some of these situations. Where does it all start? A lot of the times with the military, when they're in basic training or when they go in different areas where they can't take a lot of things with them, they can take a deck of cards, they can take some dice. Two real easy ways when you've got leisure time to get started in gambling. Okay, Baker, you can go to the next slide, please. So gambling is everywhere in Alabama. We have casinos. There are some card rooms in different areas of the state. Sports betting is very, very big in the state of Alabama. Online gambling, fantasy sports, we have dog tracks, and I have lottery. And you may say, well, we don't have a lottery in Alabama, but yet people from the state of Alabama go in 4 directions, north, south, east, and west of the adjoining states to buy lottery tickets. So any activity that involves chance or risk can be considered as an area of gambling. You go to the next slide, please. Through the National Council on Problem Gambling, we go to a yearly seminar, and the National Council on Problem Gambling has these different reports done to talk about how people bet and where they bet. So what we did on this particular slide is we took all the schools that are in the Southeast Conference, because that's right in our backyard, and we looked at what percentage do each one of the bettors bet on these different areas of gambling. And of course, in Alabama, #1 at 74% of the gambling dollars was going toward college football. That's 10% higher than the next closest state, which was Mississippi, at 64%. So when we're looking at different aspects of gambling, in fact, at the college level, many fraternity houses have one of the brothers in the house who aligns themselves with an illegal bookie, and actually they work as the agent for that bookie to bet bets at these fraternity houses. So we're doing a lot to try to work with the colleges right now to try to address this at an early age. Next slide, please. Convenience to the sources increases the potential for problem gambling. There's 2 bullet points here. In the 1970s, Las Vegas was king. In fact, this is a true story. In the late 70s, early 80s, in Montgomery, Alabama, on at least one Friday afternoon each month, a DC-9 aircraft was sitting at Danley Field in Montgomery, Alabama, a chartered aircraft that could hold over 100 people. And that flight made a nonstop flight from Montgomery to Las Vegas. They got in on Friday night. All persons on that plane had their hotel rooms paid for, their food paid for, their drinks paid for, where they could gamble all weekend. And then on Sunday night, they left Las Vegas, and that plane arrived back in Montgomery early Monday morning in time for people that were on the junket to be able to go back to work. Of course, now in 2020, Las Vegas is just one of many. So that's the way that the gambling has gotten to. And now just about every place you turn around, and both John and Les brought it out, there's an opportunity to gamble. So it's in our backyard, whether we like it or not. Now I'm going to turn this over to Roger. Okay, Roger? And you can go to the first slide for Roger, Baker.
Thank you, Jack. By the way, in the month of March, Governor Ivey issued a proclamation making March Problem Gambling Awareness Month here in Alabama. So, again, I want to first touch on what is responsible gambling, okay? Not everybody that gambles is going to become a problem gambler, all right? People that are responsible gamblers, they know how to set limits. They gamble with money that they know they can afford to lose. Maybe it's part of their weekly entertainment budget. You know, it could come from various sources, but they understand that when they gamble that money, they're probably not going to see that money back. Okay, it's part of the activity of gambling. Or as the late Kenny Rogers said, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about compulsive gamblers. Compulsive gamblers, they are unable to set limits. They will gamble with money that they cannot afford to lose, and they lie to cover up the gambling activity. They don't want anybody to know, about the fact that they're gambling away their money to live on. Next slide, please. 95% of people who gamble do it responsibly. 5% will develop a gambling problem. So if you put 100 gamblers in a room, 95% of them are going to be able to do it within limits and within boundaries, but then there'll be that 5% that develop a gambling problem. Next slide, please. So, problem gamblers who are probably already at high risk, they're most likely to be young male, lower social economic status, military or veterans, as Jack mentioned. I would also want to mention there that older women and elderly couples, substance abuse and abuse, positive attitudes about gambling, but low gambling literacy, heavy frequency of gamble. They play multiple games. They're socially isolated. They have high rates of co-occurring addiction, and they already face extensive barriers to service. 15% of the states that have gambling have absolutely no public funding, and average per capita spend is in the states that do have it is about 37 cents. So there is also a low rate of treatment seeking. It's usually less than 1%, and that's because of the high levels of shame and the stigma that goes along with problem gambling. Next slide, please, Baker. Okay, according to the National Council on Problem Gambling, problem gamblers cost society $1,500 to $3,000 per gambler per year. Okay? And if you don't believe that, just check and see how much everybody bet on the Iron Bowl game this year. Next slide, please. However, for every dollar that we spend on treatment, we save them $3 in social costs. Next slide, please. I'm trying to keep this going because I know we're in the interest of time here. So across the board, most affiliates.
We appreciate you moving through. I know there'll be a question or two.
Okay. Across the board, most affiliates, and by the way, only 37 states, including us, have state affiliates to address problem gambling, okay? But in most states, there's at least 1% of the gambling revenue to provide services. And in this way, they are being social responsible, okay? This is a funded, driven program. And what we mean by that is that the more funding we have, the more we can do to help problem gamblers. And the reality is that if you put a lottery in place here in the state of Alabama, then how are you going to be able to offer treatment to people that live in the northernmost area of the state all the way down to the southernmost part of the state, okay? And we get a small stipend every year from the Porch Band of Creek Indians, who understand that they need to be socially responsible to make sure that treatment is available for those that don't know when to say when. What do we do with that stipend? We provide trained counselors. We want to have one in every county in Alabama. We make sure that treatment is provided to everybody despite the ability to pay, and we provide public awareness about the warning signs of problem gambling. Next slide, please.
Roger.
Yes.
Roger. Todd Strange. Let me ask you a question relative to the 1%. It says 1% of the gambling revenues. When you say revenues, are you talking about the gross revenues? Are you talking about what would be net to the state or net to the enterprise.
Net to the state.
Okay, gotcha. Thank
Mr. Mayor. Uh-huh.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, next slide, please. So, some principal highlights from NCPG, okay? We recognize that the decision to gamble is an individual choice that should be made on an informed basis. The problem gambling is a national public health issue that negatively affects individuals, families, businesses, and communities throughout the country. Programs to reduce the harm from gambling addiction have a positive impact on individuals, families, communities, and society. Gambling problems encompass more than just a clinical diagnosis of a gambling disorder. They can affect people whose gambling is just beginning to move beyond simple recreation and those that are on the path to recovery and many points in between. And it should be noted, ladies and gentlemen, that gambling addiction does fit the disease model of alcoholism. And that basically means that if your life is a cucumber and then one day you become a pickle, well, you will never go back to being a cucumber again. I have over 25 years of gambling abstinence, okay? I'm a problem gambler. I'll be addicted to gambling the rest of my life, but I choose every day not to gamble and develop a better way of life. Next slide, please. The most ethical and effective way to address problem gambling is through comprehensive prevention, education, treatment, enforcement, research, and responsible gambling and recovery program. And the National Council on Problem Gambling has responsible gaming programs and outlines for casinos, for lotteries, and our organization would be glad to share that information with y'all. Problem gambling services must be available, accessible to all in need, and affordable. It goes without saying that if a person has a gambling addiction problem and they spend every penny that they have, then they won't be able to afford the treatment. Governments have a responsibility then to provide adequate funding for programs to mitigate the costs of gambling addiction. Gambling operators, suppliers, regulators play a critical role in successfully addressing problem gambling. And our mission can only be accomplished through the collaborative action of a broad range of people in organizations. Gambling addiction has been here in Alabama for many years. Next slide. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Les and not Les, but Roger and Jack. One quick question. You may have mentioned it in your comments, but what is your funding today for your organization?
About $170,000 a year.
And where does it come? What mechanism?
It comes from the
Porch Band of Creek Indians.
yeah, the majority, about 90% is from the Porch Band. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think Les, you might have had something. If you would quickly ask that question, we got about a minute. Les. Les Burnell indicated he wanted to ask a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Well, again, I apologize for taking this opportunity, but it's the only way we can do it. The only other thing that I wanted to mention on this call, and this is for any of the other individuals that might have tuned in, whether it be lobbyists or executive directors or media, given the structure that we've had to adopt over the last 30 days or so with electronic, we have subdivided this big subject into 4 different subgroups that we're going to individually, 3 individuals will be on each subcommittee. And I just wanted to announce that for the good of the whole public meeting. The possible gaming venues and applicable federal law that's going to be applied. Justice Maine is going to chair that along with Sheriff Cochran, and Philip Rawls will be on that committee. The benefits of legalized gambling, including the revenue side and how the revenue might be spent and other, quote, benefits, Young Boozer is chairing that along with Walter Bell and Ray Almondar. And then the third issue was the cost, social cost of legalized gambling. Dr. Deborah Bernhardt, along with Dr. Regina Benjamin and Dr. Mike Watson. I don't know why we loaded the doctors up on that particular committee somewhere along that happened, but Deborah and Regina and Mike. And then the last is the regulatory structures and best practices of those states that surround us and other states that might have been identified in some form or fashion that have good best practices. And Liz Huntley is going to chair that, and Carl Jemison and I will be on that committee as well. We will be having committee meetings kind of in the interim here. The next public meeting, hopefully it won't be electronic, but if it has to be, it will be at 10 o'clock on May the 15th. And you'll hear more over the next few days. We will hear at that time from other parties that stakeholders that may have a vested interest in this. But until we know whether we'll be out of shelter in place or what the ground rules are, we won't make any plans. But hopefully it'll be in the public session. Any questions from any of the study group committee members? Well, hearing none, I will thank Baker, as many others have done. Thank each of our participants. Thank those that have participated. And again, thanks to Joe Godfrey for organizing this. Volumes of materials that have been downloaded, and we can go and get that information that some of us wanted. So with that, I would wish you a good day and thank you for participating in this public meeting.